Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest instalment of our Aerobility Inspirability talks. You join me as usual from my office in Sevenoaks in Kent. The sun is shining outside still. Summer is well on its way, isn't it? And I hope you've all been flying and doing what you can to scratch the itch of getting some wind beneath your wings. Talking of which, I've got a good mate of mine on this evening, and I'll tell you what, if this talk isn't uplifting, frankly, I'm not sure what is. So more about that in just a second. But as always, these talks are designed to keep everybody connected in the Aerobility family, but of course, far beyond. These talks have now really hit the mark with many people. So please do keep telling your friends. Please do comment and share and like what we're doing. Yes, we're live this evening. Some of you will be tuning in to listen to this, but of course this is available in perpetuity on the internet. You can listen to these things and tell your friends about how to download them as a podcast through Spotify, Apple Music, and obviously pick them up on social media through the Aerobility social media channels. Please do, if you can, donate to the charity. Once again, tell your friends and share as wide as you possibly can. This is a really good sounding board for the wonderful work of Aerobility. Once again, a great link to my guest this evening. So get your questions going as you listen to what's being said this evening. And that leaves me with nothing else than to introduce Brian Wheeler. Now, Brian is actually a trustee of Aerobility and has been for a number of years. So he and I share that in common and are often found around the meeting table at Blackbush discussing the latest plans for Aerobility. But we're here this evening to talk about a journey that Brian has taken in the aviation industry, but also 3 years ago, having become disabled through an acquired disability, through an injury. So Brian, from my perspective, is the epitome of courage, tenacity and fortitude. And that began early on in Brian's career, searching for that dream job, getting knocked back, but never giving up, and never accepting no as an answer. You know, Brian is enjoying a wonderful career now as a senior person in National Air Traffic Services. You know, he started life as a Royal Air Force air traffic controller, having successfully applied to the Royal Air Force and learnt his trade. He became an instructor, if that's the right word, Brian. We'll hear about that in just a second, if you're an instructor controller. And in 2000, he joined National Air Traffic Services, NATS, the people that keep our skies safe, and as pilots, you know, stopping from flying into each other. Now, Brian started as a sector controller, rose through the ranks, and is now Deputy General Manager. He featured on Skies Above Britain in 2016, so we'll hear about that. So I'm sure he'll be signing autographs later. But his life took a direction, an unplanned direction, in April 2018. We're going to hear about what happened to Brian, but it was very unexpected, and he essentially acquired cauda equina syndrome, which was a disc that had shattered into his spinal cord, and Brian was told he wouldn't walk again. Of course, you know, overnight his life changed, and he had to come to terms with this, dig deep and find coping mechanisms to look ahead and to consider his life beyond that event. So we're going to hear all about that, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Brian now. So Brian, good evening. That's good evening. In front of you.
How's things?
Things are fine with me. As I said, you know, the sun is shining. COVID's just, I hope, a distant memory now. But the silver lining of COVID is this, right? We get to stay connected. So hopefully you've been doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo your thoughts. Let's hope that yesterday's announcement from the Prime Minister sees us rushing headlong into some normality as we get to the back end of this year, and certainly more flying for all of us.
Yeah, here. I know it's just a bug we all have. You just can't shake it. I remember my flying instructor said to me, he said, just be careful. Flying is like a drug. It's addictive and it'll empty your pockets. So
never a true word.
yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's crack on, Brian. We've got lots to get through this evening. As I said in the introduction, I think there's going to be a lot of folks from Aerobility and beyond hanging on your every word, because you're a living, breathing example, Brian, of someone who has really shown courage and strength of character through adversity. So we'll really looking forward to talking about that, Brian, and sharing your thoughts. But let's take the clock back to the boyhood dream and aviation. So how did it start? Tell us about the yearning to get into the air or to get yourself involved in aviation.
So I go back to probably when I was about 13, 14, that usual time when you're asked by school teachers, what do you want to do with your life? And if I'm honest, I didn't really know. You go, as you grow up, you go through, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a fireman, I want to be this, I want to be that. But there was always, I'd like to fly. And it was when I got to that age when you have to think about what subjects you're going to do at school and how does that shape your future. I thought, well, what do I need to do then to be an airline pilot? And at the time, British Airways were running their cadet pilot sponsorship scheme. And in order to get onto that, you needed to have A-levels in maths and physics. Neither of which were subjects that I was any good at, but I didn't let that stop me, and so I did maths and physics at A-level with a view to becoming a British Airways pilot. I took my A-levels at the age of 18 in 1989, and I managed the lofty heights of an E in physics and an N in maths. Nobody really knows what N stands for, numpty, nearly, whatever you want to say, really. But I didn't pass maths, which was a bit of a blocker to getting onto the British Airways scheme. So what to do? My father was in the Royal Navy, and at the time he was based in Europe at a place called Shape, in a little Belgian town called Mons, southeast of Brussels. And I went to live there for a year and pondered my future. And I spent the next 3 months teaching myself A-level maths with a view to retaking it, to hopefully passing, and then progressing what I wanted to do. So I did that. 3 months later, I sat the exam and I got an N, another one. At this point, you probably think this isn't going to happen, is it? But I spent yet another 3 months and finally passed, got a C. Good, I thought. In the meantime, I'd started to learn to fly in Belgium, to try and gain a PPL. I was being instructed at an Air Force base called Chievres. My instructor was an American B-52 bomber pilot, and we had one of the longest runways in Belgium to land a little PA-38 on, so it was great. Even my landings were fine on there. And it was taking a long time, though, because the weather in Belgium isn't really conducive to learning to fly quickly. So at the age of 19, I packed myself off to Florida for 4 weeks and gained a PPL. Came back, converted it to a Belgian PPL, which only allows you to fly in Belgian sovereign airspace, and there's not a lot of that. In the meantime, I applied to British Airways, and I sat their tests, and the results came back, and the result was I didn't have the aptitude to fly, which I thought was a bit novel, given that I had a license. But undeterred, I thought, right, I need to think of what to do next. Now, I swore that I would never join the forces because I'd been to a military school, and I said, it's not for me, I don't really want to join the forces. But I changed my mind, and I applied to the Royal Navy. I thought I'll be a helicopter pilot. And I went to the assessment centre, and they said, you haven't got the aptitude to fly. recurring theme now. And so, much to my father's chagrin, I applied to the RAF because obviously he was in the Royal Navy. He didn't really want the sun in the crabs, and the Air Force said, "You haven't got the aptitude to fly." At this point, I should have walked away, but they did say, "But you do have the aptitude to be either a navigator or an air traffic controller." Neither of which I'd really looked into, didn't know a great deal about, but either of them really. I mean, I knew what they did. And so I rang my dad. I said, well, "What do you think?" And I always remember he said to me, "Don't be a navigator, son." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "What are your transferable skills?" "Be an air traffic controller." And I said, "Okay." So I said to the Air Force, "I'd love to be an air traffic controller, please." And so I did. I did my officer training at Cranwell, and I did 4 sunny years at RAF Benson, which was a great time. Before, and you were dead right in the introduction, I became an instructor at RAF Shawbury for 4 years. And I loved it. I loved my time in the Air Force. But after 8 years, I left and I joined NATS. But again, not without failure in the meantime, because when I went through the process to join NATS, I got to the final interview stage and failed. But then got another chance 3 months later and got in. And I guess there's an old adage, isn't there? You know, you do not succeed unless you failed, and that's really true. And no, I can't think of anybody, certainly any successful businessman, hasn't got to where they've got to without failing. You have to fail to learn, to get better, and that. I learned that quite early on in my career. Little did I know how much that was going to form part of my life 20 years later when what happened. So I joined NATS in 2000, and part of that training was some more flying. And there was 10 hours of flying. No, it was 15 hours actually of flying. So I went to Wickham Air Park, and as part of my air traffic controller training, 15 hours of flying, which allowed me to go solo again, and that was in 2000. That's the last time I flew, so quite some time ago. We'll come on later, no doubt, into what my plans are for the rest of this year. So the training in NATS was intensive, is intensive. It's shortened a bit now from 2000 when I went through, and it was an 18-month course then, but we did all of the ratings at that point. So you did a bit of aerodrome control, you did a little bit of procedural radar, and then you did the area radar course at the end. And
can I just sorry to interrupt, can I take you back a few months on that selection process? Because on the Skies Above Britain, I think it was, where you were featured, autographs later, there was a very interesting point that was raised about the number of applicants versus those that are accepted. To me, it feels as tough as, and you know, probably the jeopardy of your feeling the pressure, as much as the career you initially looked to go into. Am I right? I mean, I get the impression it's not for everybody, and it's tough.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, John. It's and the difficult thing, because I've done some interviewing for NATS after I'd been with the company for a few years, and it's very difficult as well to have somebody sit in front of you in an interview panel and be able to tell whether or not they're going to be a good air traffic controller. So you do all the psychometric testing, and by the way, the paper testing I was absolutely useless at, where you try and formulate laid out cubes with different shapes on each side, and it said, if this flat cube is made up and turned through 180 degrees, what will it look like? So you see people standing on the head and thinking, how am I going to make that work? So, but that process is really tough, and you're right, there is jeopardy at the end, because it's fairly brutal, and Skies Above Britain showed that, and you know, you have to be committed to learning, preparing yourself, and putting in the hard work, because as with most things in life, if you don't work hard, you're not going to get to where you want to get to. But I can't remember the numbers, so I won't quote numbers because I'm bound to get them wrong. But the attrition rate was quite high, and the jeopardy was high, and I guess I had a bit of that personally as well, because whilst I'd been an air traffic controller and I knew I had the skill set within me, it is different in the application of that skill set, and there was no guarantee of a job. So I'd left a career in the RAF with no guarantee of progressing through the next 18 months. There was a calculated risk, don't get me wrong, but a risk nonetheless. And rightly so in terms of the intensity of the course, right? Because if you're flying in a commercial airliner, you want to be damn sure that the people responsible for the safety of the airspace know what they're doing. And that is absolutely the case. You know, with NATS as an ANSP, safety is number one. Of course it is, and it has to be. But the training is second to none. Absolutely second to none.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, that was loud and clear in the program. And you know, in terms of the day you find out you've been selected, you know, you go out for your celebratory meal and a few beers, and then the work starts. So tell us about the training to get you solo, essentially.
Yeah, so it's again, it took about so it was, the college course was 18 months, and then live training was, in my case, 14 months. So it's quite a long, you know, from pulling the trigger to bang, it's quite a long period of time. And again, rightly so, you've got to make sure, and the people that are instructing you have to make sure that on the day that you're signed off, much like flying an aeroplane, the person sitting next to you wants to make sure that you're not going to put the aeroplane in an uncompromising position. And it's the same for air traffic controllers. Is this person going to put the aircraft under their control in uncompromising positions? No. And I suppose I was lucky in a way, because I'd already been a controller. One of the first hurdles people have to overcome is talking on the radio. And people, both pilots and air traffic controllers, can be daunted by that, because it's a whole new language, isn't it? You know, you're speaking using the phonetic alphabet, and it's all very regimented in what you should say. And so I didn't have to worry too much about that. But the intensity of the sectors, the airspace that we control, is the most complex, certainly in Europe, if not in the world. Now, I've been lucky enough to go across to Washington, which is comparable, but not comparable, because the main difference between the UK airspace and American airspace, of course, is they've got far more airspace to play around in. We are but a small island, and everything is compacted. And you'll see the picture behind me, if I get out of the way. All of those tracks on there, so all of those lines represent an aircraft, and they're colour coded for the airports in the southeast of England. Red being Heathrow, green is Gatwick, blue is London City, the light yellow is Luton, and the darker yellow is Stansted. And that is a visualization that Nats did from a video called London 24, which you can find on YouTube. And that is just a snapshot of all aircraft over the southeast of England in a 24-hour period, commercial jets only. Obviously, that was pre-COVID, but that just shows how busy that airspace is.
That is fascinating. That really is amazing. And it just goes to show what goes on above our heads that we may not necessarily see, which leads me on to a really good question. And that is, what does a sector controller do? Now, if I'm not mistaken, obviously you're successful with your training. You become a fully fledged air traffic controller. You plug in. What's your job?
I can give it really simply, and you alluded to it in the introduction, actually. Don't let the aircraft hit, and then you've won. But, that's a very simple way of looking at it. But it is sometimes it's described as a as a 3D game of chess. But the airspace is sectorized, and you know the clue is in the title. You are a sector controller, so you are responsible for a volume of airspace. And there are standing agreements, which is a term that we use. So you get an aircraft, for instance, I'll give you an example, it's the best way to do it. If you're on an aircraft and you're flying off to Hong Kong, obviously the first air traffic controller you're going to speak to is the ground controller at Heathrow Tower, sitting in the tower. They're going to give you your pushback clearance and then your start clearance. And then as you start to taxi, and get towards the runway, they transfer you to the air controller, the tower controller, who will give you the clearance to depart. They give you your takeoff clearance. Once you're airborne, they will transfer you to the radar controllers at Swanwick. So in this example, you're heading off out to the east. So the pilot will call the radar controller passing 3,000 or 4,000 feet. He's climbing to 6,000 feet on the standard departure. My job then was to climb that aircraft from 6,000 feet to 15,000 feet. Sounds simple, right? Just climbing from 6 to 15,000 feet and transfer to the next controller, who's expecting it climbing to 15,000 feet. It would be really easy if it was the only aircraft in the sky, of course, and there were no interactions. Unfortunately, the airspace was designed in the 1960s when there weren't as many airplanes, and there certainly were not anywhere near as many airplanes as there are flying into the likes of Stansted and Luton. So it won't surprise you to hear that a departure from Heathrow heading out to the east interacts with departures from Luton, Northolt, London City, Stansted, and also arrivals into Luton and Stansted. So you weave the aircraft all around one another. So there is a lot of, in the London lower airspace, climbing and descending aircraft to 1,000 feet above and below one another, waiting for them to pass. I'm doing the typical air traffic controller and pilot thing and talking with my hands, waiting for them to pass, and then continuing the climb and descent on the aircraft and transferring them to the next controller. And typically, you can expect to work between 10, 15, 20 aircraft at any one time. And that becomes the skills that you need to be able to do that well are good division of attention, good scanning of the radar, and a good short-term memory. We're very good as air traffic controllers at making quick decisions because we have to, and that's what we're taught. Give us a wall and ask us what colour paint we want on it, and it takes 6 months.
No, that's a really layman's description in 5 minutes of what the guys and girls do at Swanwick. And just tell us about what is Swanwick? Where is it? What happens there?
So Swanwick is on the south coast of England, about 7 miles from Southampton, and quite close to the River Hamble. And if you were to draw a line from Birmingham to East Midlands Airport, everything below that line down to the French coast and encompassing the whole of the UK is that part of the UK flight information region which Swanwick controls. There are 2 control centres. There's London Area Control and London Terminal Control. And again, if you take the volume of airspace I've just mentioned and you cut it at 25,000 feet, the area, and it's, there are a few nuances around that, but above 25,000 feet is the London Area Control Centre, below 25,000 feet is the London Terminal Control Centre. And so that's how the 2 operations are split. And then the airspace is all sectorised in each of those 2 operations. And I suppose it's worth mentioning as well that in the terminal control area, not only do you have area radar controllers, you also have approach radar controllers carrying out the function for the 5 major international airports in the southeast of England. So all the approach control is carried out from Swanwick as well.
Okay, nice. So before we go, I had a couple of questions about what happens when it goes wrong. But before we get there, I'm on my way back from my holidays. I'm heading into Heathrow. Captain comes on and says, we've got to go around in circles for 10 minutes. over, what is it, Biggin Hill, Bovingdon, and I think somewhere else. I'm sure you can enlighten us. But why is that? And how does it all knit together?
Why is it? So in very simple terms, because only one aeroplane can use the tarmac at one time, and I have to do that. I'll try and explain this because it's quite complicated. So I don't really want to go into the slot allocation system because that really will bore people. But in an hour, Heathrow lands between 40 and 45 aircraft an hour. We're talking pre-COVID here. It would be really great if they all arrived into UK airspace 10 miles in trail of one another so that they didn't have to hold. And we're working actually on future airspace design to try and minimize the amount of holding, because nobody likes going around in circles. It's not very efficient. But unfortunately, you can get 45 aircraft in an hour, but 25 could arrive in the first 20 minutes or even in the first 15 minutes. And so you go back to only one of them can land at any one time, and you can only stream so many. And so you keep them in the four holds. And there are the four holds. You've got Biggin and Ockham to the south of Heathrow, Lambourne and Bovingdon to the north of Heathrow. And so you go around in circles until it's your turn.
Right. Okay. Simple as that. So when things go wrong, now, as pilots, we like as little drama as possible in the cockpit, but when there is a drama and we need your help, or at least from your perspective at NATS, the aircraft in controlled airspace, and you hear a mayday, what happens? I mean, what's the process?
You'll be pleased to hear that it's a very calm process, and necessarily so, because the last thing you need if you're in distress in the cockpit is a distressed voice on the other end of the radio. You need a calming influence, and it is all very regimented, I suppose is the best way to put it. We need to determine what is wrong and what do you want, because we're there to help. You tell us what's up, and we know and we acknowledge that you might not be able, you could throw out a mayday call, but you might not be in a position right now to tell us anything else, because aviate, navigate, communicate, right? And so you want to get control of the aircraft. Once you're, as the pilot, happy with you're not about to fall out of the sky, you then tell us what the problem is and what you want, and we make it happen. And that is just a lot of communication chain. So let's use an example. You're a twin-engined aircraft and you've lost an engine. That's normally a mayday. You might want to land on the opposite end runway because it's less flying distance and you want to get it on the ground. We then facilitate that through communication and coordination with the airport via the tower controllers. So we ring them, we say, we've got this aircraft, he's here, you've got this problem, wants this. They sort all the stuff out on the ground. Obviously, you might want to be met by fire crews or whatever, depending on the nature of the emergency.
Interesting. So, and of course, the other drama that you don't necessarily like in a day is the Royal Air Force getting in the way. Tell us about QRA, what it is, and then how you all of a sudden have to manage something that is not planned and unpredictable.
Again, so you will have seen in the news, there have been a few high-profile events in the last year to 18 months, especially when, so QRA is the quick reaction aircraft. The RAF scramble them. Quite often they go supersonic, and that's when it makes the news, because you hear the sonic boom and people's greenhouses smash. But you're right, it does cause, again, it's managed in a way, but you're dealing with an unpredictable event, because the nature of that event is we don't quite know what is going on. Now, in 9 times out of 10, it is just that the aircraft has lost communication with us as air traffic controllers. That causes a chain of events to occur, and the military will launch the typhoons. our job is to facilitate the typhoons getting to the aircraft in as short a time as possible. And we facilitate that by moving our aircraft out of the way. And then we're at the beck and call of the MOD at that point, because they tell us what they want, where they want to go, and we again keep things out of the way to allow that to happen.
Yeah, interesting. So, okay, you're turning up for a shift. You know, roughly speaking, what's in front of you, but I guess every day is different. I mean, how do you manage the stress of the job? How do you cope with, that time of day when it's just piling up on you? I'm assuming you fall back on your training, but how do you sort of, manage that?
You're absolutely right. The training is key to it, and I think I said this on Skies Above Britain. I found it far more stressful talking to a camera than I ever did doing my job, because you know what you're doing in your job, and you are trained to such a level that it is just second nature. You put that headset on, you sit in front of that radar, and you bang, bang, bang. You know what you're doing, and it can be constant. So you can sit there for 45 minutes, an hour, and not stop talking, which for somebody like me is great, because you just keep going and going and going and going. But the best thing about the job is at the end of the shift, you take the headset off, you wrap the cord up, you put it in the locker. That's it. No hundreds of emails to come to and all of the other stuff that actually can become more stressful. When you sat in front of that radar, I've gone into work with a head cold and sat in front of the radar, and I don't think that I've got a cold when I've sat there, because you're so focused. Everything else, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You're just totally focused on that radar screen, and that is the be all and end all.
Yeah. Really interesting. Really interesting I've heard it said, with some of the guests we've had on, from a fast jet pilot's perspective, you sort of take one cassette out and put another one in, depending on the situation. You leave the troubles at home, you sit down, you plug in, and that's the focus, the bubble. Okay, well, you mentioned about unpredicted events. You talked about coping mechanisms. So, let's move on to this event, Brian, that happened to you that changed the direction in your life in 2018, I think it was. So take us back to that day in April, and fill us in on what happened.
Yeah, okay. Well, it started, or did it? And this is one of the things that I'll talk about. April the 29th was a Saturday, and I was in the supermarket using a self-service checkout. And bizarrely, I was buying a bag of peanuts, and I always remember that. I put them through, so not heavy. And my back went, for want of a better phrase, and just locked up, and I couldn't move, and I was in an awful lot of pain. I've had back problems in the past. I had a back operation in 1996 where I had my lower lumbar disc herniated, and I had that removed. And I'd had a few other little episodes like the one that I experienced that day, but this just felt different and really, really painful. I saw a duty doctor that night, and they tested me actually for cauda equina, which, for anybody who doesn't know, cauda equina syndrome is a rare but pretty devastating back injury where the nerves, so at the base of your spine, the nerves hang like a horse's tail. So cauda equina is the Latin for a horse's tail, and the nerves gather there, and if they get damaged, it's pretty serious. Nerve damage, for anybody who has experienced it, is a lot worse than a broken bone, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So this doctor tested me for cauda equina syndrome and said, no, you're absolutely fine, and she was right. There were none of the red flags. The red flags for that particular syndrome are searing pain down the backs of both legs, saddle anesthesia, so numbness in your bum, or any disturbance to your bowel or bladder. And I had none of that. And she tested for the whole lot, and she tested all the reflexes, and it was fine. So I was sent home with painkillers and muscle relaxants and everything else. So that was on the Saturday, and things started to ease. And I remember, so we're now on the evening of Thursday, the 3rd of May. It's fine, normal evening, didn't do a great deal, had dinner, watched TV. In the middle of the night, I started to get the most horrific pain down the back of my legs, and I thought, can I get comfortable here? And I got to about 4 in the morning and cracked and telephoned 111. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll send an ambulance. And so an ambulance arrived at about 6. I was taken to hospital, got into A&E at about 7. And it did all the usual preliminary checks. They could see I was in quite a lot of pain, so they put me on a morphine drip, and they said, we're going to scan your back. So in the meantime, I was a little bit worried because I hadn't experienced pain like this ever before, and I've got quite a high tolerance for pain. So I rang my partner Louise, who was at work, and said, I'm in A&E, and so she left work and came to A&E, and she was there when I was put into the MRI scanner. And so they scanned my lower back, and when I was in there, I lost all feeling from the waist down. I couldn't move anything, couldn't move my legs, couldn't wiggle my toes. And I remember coming out of the scanner and doing this and saying, I can't feel my feet, I can't move my toes, I can't do my toes. And Louise was saying, you can, you're fine. And I said, I can't. I said, this is, what's going on? And I was aware of cauda equina, so I thought, is this what's happening to me? So I'd been taken to Portsmouth Hospital, and they did this scan, and then they said, you're now under the care of a surgeon in Southampton. And what he wants to do is, and that's a picture of me actually in Portsmouth Hospital that night, between the scans, that was. So they said the surgeon wants to scan you again, and then you're going to be transferred to Southampton for an emergency op. So the second scan took place, I think, at about 6 o'clock. I was then transferred by ambulance to Southampton, and they said, he's not going to do that operation tonight. He's going to do it tomorrow morning. And I said, okay, fine. But I knew, so there's a golden 48-hour period for giving you a better chance of recovery. In fact, the earlier they can do it, the better. Anyway, after the second scan, they took me to the Southampton, and they said, yeah, diagnosis is cauda equina syndrome. The disc at L4 in my lower back had shattered. And I'm blessed, hereditary-wise, with a small spinal canal, stenosis of the spine. And because of that, when that disc erupted, it had nowhere to go. So it took out all of the nerves at the base of my spine, which is what had caused A, all of that pain, and B, all the neurology problems I was experiencing at the time. So Saturday morning, the 5th of May, 10 o'clock in the morning, do the operation, wheeled back onto the ward, surgeon comes up. I remember it was a bank holiday weekend, it was really hot. And I'm on the orthopedic ward now, and there's people being in and out, people have fallen off. Someone had come off a greenhouse. There was an amateur jockey who had broken 3 vertebrae in his back. Surgeon came to me, usual question, was it a success? Yeah, and he looked at me and he said, well, the operation was a success in terms of I've removed the bits from your spinal cord. He said, but I do have to tell you there's a pretty good chance you're never going to walk again. And that is quite a surreal thing to hear. And I remember feeling almost as if I was watching that conversation and he wasn't talking to me. And the only thing I could say, I looked at him and I just said, we'll see. And I meant it. I thought, this can't be true. It can't be happening. So that was the 5th of May. And again, over the next 5-6 days, I saw people come in and go out. And this picture is one from later on. This was last year, but I'll talk about that as we move on. So I was in Southampton General from that day forwards, and then on about the 10th of May, I was assessed by, so there are a number of spinal units in the country. I think there are 17 specialist spinal injury units, and the nearest one to me was Odstock at Salisbury. And you don't just get to go there, you are assessed for how damaged you are. And they assessed me and said, yeah, you're pretty damaged, so you're going there. So on May the 15th, I was transferred from Southampton to Odstock. And I'll always remember the nurses, actually, we spoke about this afterwards. They said, you arrived here as a pretty broken man, not much chance of walking again, bladder and bowel function gone, and paraplegic. And literally in a minute, everything changed. And it's quite a lot to try and process, but I thought, I went back to, well, you've dealt with worse setbacks than this, it'll be fine. It was almost a sense of disbelief. And actually, my character, I'm a bit stubborn, and I thought, no, there's no way that this is going to be the final outcome. And I think with any life-changing event, you get to decide what the final outcome is going to be. And you go one of two ways. You either think, this is really terrible, my life's over, that's it. Or you think, okay, let's see where we are. Let's see what we've got. You have to be realistic. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to listen to what the experts are telling you, but always have in the back of your mind that they're not always right. And I set out to prove that. So the first few days in Odstock, you're not allowed to leave the bed. You're completely bed bound. Then I was fitted with a wheelchair, and the process of rehabilitation starts. And there are a few stories in there. Now, obviously, I've just alluded to the fact that I'd lost the ability to walk. I'd lost bowel function, and I'd lost bladder function. So before I became disabled, and I think it may be true of a lot of people, if you see somebody in a wheelchair, your first thought is, blimey, poor person, they can't walk. Actually, that was the least of my worries, not being able to walk, because in my head I thought I'll always walk again. The loss of bowel and bladder was mentally so much harder, because you think, it's the thing, isn't it? It's the British, we don't talk about stuff like that. But bizarrely, on a spinal unit, it's the topic of conversation over breakfast, because everybody's in the same boat. But I'll always remember, and most, and it's normally men who wince more, the day that they took the indwelling catheter out of me and produced what can only be described as a in my mind, a 10-foot long pipe, and said, right, you're going to put that into your bladder. My response was, no, I'm not. And they said, well, you're going to have to learn. And it was a fairly traumatic first attempt, or first 5 attempts, which resulted in a lot of blood and a sense of humour failure from me, and a reinsertion of the indwelling catheter, because I said, I'm not ready for this. I've got to get this right first before I'll be able to do that. Now, Louise had said to me, and again, it's not a question you ever want to have to answer, you've lost those 3 things. If you can only get 2 back, which 2 are you going to pick? Now, I've tested this with a few people, and most people answered the same. And I said, well, if there's one that doesn't come back, I'll pick bladder, because I'll be able, I will overcome this. And thankfully, all 3 came back. And the surgeon actually said to me that he thought there was zero chance of my bladder ever working again. And so the fact that it does is great. I can't claim to have done anything about that because you can't control that. I certainly have been able to control the learning to walk again, and that leads me into, you know, the fantastic work that the guys and girls at Oddstock did. I mean, the physiotherapy there was brilliant. You learn an awful lot about yourself, but also about your body. And I remember a couple of interesting conversations about, you've got to pick your wheelchair. And I said, I don't want one. And they said, no, you don't understand. You've got to pick one, because unless you pick one, if you leave and subsequently you need one, you're not going to get one that's good for you, and you might cause yourself more damage. And I said, I'm not having one. So it's incumbent on all of us to get us to a point where I leave here not in the wheelchair. And on August the 6th, 2018, I left there on crutches, which, when I think back to May the 5th, was never something that I thought potentially was going to happen. I then, so Louise found a really, really good place for me to go. And were it not for this place, I would not be where I am today. And it's a very small world. And I met another Aerobility trustee at this place, and I'll come on to that very shortly. So the place in question, so Hobbs Rehabilitation were the physiotherapy team, and they're absolutely brilliant. Neurophysios were, and I can honestly, hand on heart, say, without spending 7 weeks with those guys, I wouldn't be walking. They took me and made me better, basically. And I worked with them and a charity called the Injured Jockeys Fund. There's a place called Oaksey House in Lambourne in Berkshire, right by the Gallops. And I found myself, so as an inpatient there, so between September 18 and January 19, I did 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks in various blocks. And all of a sudden I'm launched now into a place with professional athletes. Now, jockeys are a different breed. They are tough as old boots. They get on these horses, they get thrown off, they break every bone in their body, they go to Oaksey House, they get fixed, they get back on the horse and do it all again. But all of a sudden, I'm now surrounded by people who just want to get better, which is exactly where my head was. I just want to get better. I want to be the best that I can be, given the the deficiencies, for want of a better phrase, in my neurology. And so I say I can't speak highly about that. I've just remembered something that I missed, which helps build the picture of the mental side of all of this stuff. About probably 4 weeks into my time at Oddstock, I just started doing more dynamic physio, and I'd got some pain down my right side between my ribs. And I thought, I've just pulled a muscle, it's intercostal. It would hurt when I breathed in, and I'd say to the physios, I don't know what it is, and they dig their thumbs in and try and make it better. And that went on for about a week. And then it all went horribly wrong one Saturday night when I really couldn't breathe, and my oxygen sats dropped. And I was surrounded by people trying to stick needles in me and all sorts, and rushed off down to the scanner. And they brought me back and said, yeah, that pain that you thought was just muscular, you've got multiple pulmonary embolisms in your lung. And it was probably 3 or 4 days before that would have killed you. So it's a good job that we found it. Here's an injection, shove it in your belly, and you're going to be doing this for the next year. So blood thinners just to get rid of all of those clots. And one of the things I don't like about hospitals is you're lying in a bed, pretty vulnerable, and the great and the good appear at the base of your bed and start talking about you. And I don't like that. I said, don't talk about me, talk to me, because I can hear what you're saying. And I'd picked up on a couple of things that they were saying on this. And they said, right, okay, we're just going to give it to you straight. So not only have you got these multiple embolisms, we also think that from an earlier scan, you've got a rare form of cancer in your upper spine. Oh, and by the way, we think you've got leukemia as well, which when you're trying to process becoming paralyzed and then having something which may have killed you in a few days' time, and now you hear the C word and leukemia, you think, anything else? And that was sort of my mindset, because I turned to them and said, listen, fine, let's just determine what we have and what we haven't got, and then we'll be able to deal with it. And the good news is it took about 48 hours, and they said, yeah, we were wrong. There is no cancer. There is no leukemia. So you're good. So fast forward again back to Oaksey House, and I'm having physio one day. I'm lying on the physio bench and being manipulated into positions my broken body didn't really want to go into. And I hear a chirpy guy on the other bench being worked on. So we're in the same room, and picked up on his love of flying, and we got chatting afterwards. I said, "Oh, have you ever heard of a charity called Aerobility?" Because obviously I was aware of the charity. It was before I was a trustee, obviously, but aware of the charity through NATS. And he said, heard of them. I'm learning to fly with them. And that was Mr. Tucker. So Neil Tucker was being treated in the same place as I was. And it just goes to show what a small world it really is.
That's it. That is incredible. And I'm going to let you take a breath. Obviously, this place, produces the best that life has to offer, and their abilities caught them. But I can tell you're an air traffic controller, and that you are stubborn, and that you have an analytical brain, because Brian, what you've just described there, in the space of 10 minutes is extraordinary, and I'm trying to process it. So, God only knows what you've been through. Can I ask a question which relates to the acceptance of the direction your life has taken, but also how what mechanisms that you use to take on that acceptance. I mean, I've suffered bereavement, and my coping mechanism is to talk. I've got friends who've suffered injuries or have been through cancer. And their mechanism is to join groups and talk to like-minded people, because getting it off your chest is really important when you're having to come to terms with something. Can you just give us a bit of an insight there on, because actually you're on the journey right now, you're still on this journey, and it's a journey that you've taken control of admirably, and everyone has a grip of that steering wheel, perhaps in different ways, right? And from what I'm hearing, you've really, you're not only gripping that steering wheel tightly, but you are absolutely, determining the direction you're going to take your life. Tell us about the acceptance, and tell us about your coping mechanisms, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that will take strength from your strength.
Yeah, there's a couple of bit parts to that for me. So in the early days, normal human reaction is, why me? And you ask that question, well, why me? And the surgeon said, you're just unlucky. And that was what he said. He said that the chance of that happening is 1 in 100,000. So bad luck, which doesn't help. It doesn't help that, because you think, well, that's not giving me the answer that I want. So then you start looking for it, and you think, well, so I was a runner before, and when I look back and reflect on that, maybe I was running too much. I wasn't resting, and rest is a massive important part, and I'm rubbish at it. I'm rubbish at switching off. I'm rubbish at resting. I keep going. And I was rowing as well on the Concept 2 row, and I thought, well, maybe it was that. But you quickly realise that. And that's a picture of me when I did my one and only marathon in 2015, the London Marathon.
What was your time?
3 hours and 44 minutes. And
that's impressive.
And that plays to the analytical part, John, because I did a training plan to run a 3 hour 45 marathon, and I stuck rigidly to it and saw the results. But when you start looking for why, well, was it this or was it that, you're never going to get an answer. And so it's a fruitless exercise trying to work out why this has happened and what could I have done to prevent it. Well, it doesn't matter because it's happened. And so you just would drive yourself mad. Now, when I was in hospital, I would also, and I learned that this was a human trait as well. I would get frustrated, is probably the right word, at people. So Odstock was great, had a lovely garden, and it was a really hot and sunny summer of 2018. And people would come and visit us all as patients. And I would think it was grossly unfair that they could walk and I couldn't. And it would eat me up. And I think you've got to get over this. You've got to get your head past this. And I have a really good friend who I worked with in that, and he took redundancy and is now a counsellor, addictions counsellor actually. And he texted me when I was in Odstock, and he said, he said, I know you're strong, I know you're stubborn, I know all of this stuff about you, but do not underestimate what this might do to your head. And if you can get any help, then do. My initial reaction was, whatever, I don't need that. But a few days later, I thought maybe he's right, because it was at the time that I was struggling to process the whole catheterization thing, and I thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get my head into a place where that becomes my normality? How am I going to get my head in a place of, you might never walk again, even though my brain was saying, well, you are going to walk again, so that's a pointless conversation. But I thought, no, I'll do it, because there was a psychologist doctor assigned to the unit, and so I made an appointment. And it was not quite what I thought it was going to be. I thought it would be all a little bit too, I don't know the best way to describe it. I didn't think that she would get me, is probably the best way to say it, but she did. She just let me talk. And I had 4 sessions of just talking. And one of the funniest things she said was, it's fine to have these thoughts about people walking and how it's unfair. And she said, but just don't let what's in your head come out of your mouth. And I said, okay, well, that's good guidance. And then the bit, I suppose, that helped as well is in the October of 2018, I had a follow-up appointment with the surgeon. And bear in mind, the surgeon who said, I've got to tell you, there's a really good chance you're never going to walk again. I walked in with a walking stick. And his face will live with me forever, because he swung his chair around, pointed at me and said, you're not supposed to be like this. And I said, you don't know me, do you? And from that point on, we've become really good friends. And this video, actually, that's being played now, was 5 days after I was told, you're never going to walk again. And you can see the concentration on my face. I mean, normally I stick my tongue out when I'm concentrating, but there, I've got no control of my lower body there. So I've got orthotics in right up to my knee. You can see my feet, I'm not planting them anywhere. They're just going where they're going. And it was there that I thought, you've got something. I think, so I think back to the first time my toe twitched, and I'd be shouting at my toes. I'd lie in the bed and shout at them and will them to give me something, because if there's a flicker, you've got a connection and then you can build on it. And I remember Louise said to me, your toe just went, and I said, no, it didn't. And we got the phone out and we videoed the the toe flickering. And it was that point that I thought, right, you can do this. And that's what when I say you have to be realistic and honest, because obviously if my spinal cord had been severed, there's no chance. And then you have to accept that. But you work with what you've got. And I guess, my full circle is to run again. I've applied for and very much hope to complete the Southampton half marathon on September the 4th, and I will run that and raise money for Aerobility. But in my mind, running a half marathon completes the circle from life changing in a minute on May the 5th to getting to this point. This video that's playing now is I'm taking weekly running coaching with a guy in Southampton who is really helping me because of the neurological deficit. A lot of my muscles don't work, and so all bodies are lazy. They take the path of least resistance. So it's trying to modify the run so that it encourages the right muscles to work. But my left side is still pretty well damaged, and obviously my feet are still numb. The backs of my legs are numb. So I suffer hugely with fatigue because of the deficit. Walking if you haven't got a disability is second nature. When you lose that ability, and I think back to being in hospital and being tipped out the wheelchair and told crawl back to it, I couldn't do it. I was a 46-year-old man and I couldn't crawl, and I thought, hey, this is serious. My muscles had wasted to a point that I couldn't lift my knee off the floor to be able to propel myself forward. So I dragged myself with my elbows. And you think, okay, but I suppose the thing that was always in my mind is it wasn't on my list of things to do before I turned 50, learn to walk again. And by the way, it's a lot further down at the age of 46 if you fall than it was when I was 18 months. So you're really quite protective of yourself because you don't want to end up on the floor because it hurts more. But it's certainly, it's been a journey of 3 years. The journey continues, and I'll always remember my physio said to me, so this marathon then, are you going to walk it or are you going to run it? And I looked at her and said, well, what do you think? And she said, I knew you were going to say that. And I said, well, walking it, wouldn't feel like a challenge to me. I have to run it, and I have to run that, as I've said, to complete that circle. And also, it's been 21 years since I last flew, and I've passed my medical flight test. I've got my medical certificate, and so the video, that picture there is. So I've tried all sorts in my recovery, including cryotherapy. So that chamber is minus 123, I think it was, degrees Celsius. It's cold. You go in there for 3 minutes, but it's amazing for things like rheumatoid arthritis, if you've got breaks in bones, and I thought it would be good for me. I think the jury's still out, I guess, on neurological issues, but it was fun whilst it lasted. Just before you go into there, you go into the pre-chamber, which is a balmy minus 73 degrees. So it's cold.
Incredible. Wow. Now listen, I've got 2 more questions, and then we'll go into some questions that have come in. Now, those that are old enough will remember where they were when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, or other major events. I remember fighting back the tears, Brian, at one of our Aerobility balls. It must have been 2019, I would assume. And we got onto the stage, a living, breathing individual who had triumphed hugely over adversity. You reduced the CEO of NATS to tears in the introduction. You walked up on the stage and you told your story and inspired people to support Aerobility. Incredible courage, Brian, really. There's people in that room, a lot of people who are disabled, who would have chimed with exactly what you were saying. And I really do hope that there's people listening to this who will realize they do have a journey out of troubles they might be in at the moment, both physical or mental. So to that, I applaud you hugely. What did that evening feel like for you?
Well, it was amazing, almost surreal. to walk up onto that stage, what was it, November 2019, so just some 18 months after being told you'd never walk again, and be able to just give a small version of what had happened so far was incredible, really. And I'll never forget that night. And I've made it almost like a quest of mine, if you like, to it. What I would like to do is more of that, talk to people about what has happened, and where a life-changing event doesn't actually need to be anything more than just another one of life's events, and you get to play a huge part in that outcome, because ultimately you decide your own destiny. And if I can help just one person realize that it's never quite as bad as it seems, then I'll be happy. But you know, as with everything in life, though, nothing comes without hard work and a little bit of pain. Now, you know, I don't go on about pain. You know, as anybody with a disability, and especially neurological issues, will know, it's a daily fight to control that pain, and sometimes it comes at the worst possible time. But you can't let it get on top of you, because it's your life, and if you just let it get on top of you, it becomes all consuming, and you focus on nothing else other than that. So I think you just look to do the best that you can with what you've got, and that's all you can do. And you know, I could sit here and think, oh well, that left ankle's never going to work, that numbness is never going to, and it might never come back. You know, nerves are very strange things, I've learned. You know, they repair at 1 millimeter a day. And there's a lot of millimeters between the base of my spine and the tips of my toes. So there's always hope. And that's the thing, you know, you just wake up every day and think, right, concentrate on what you can do rather than what you can't do.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And my second question was related to that. You know, if there's anybody in a position similar to you, you know, there is hope, isn't there? And you know, what would you say to the Brian who was, you know, in that hospital bed 3 years ago?
I think I've touched on some of it. Firstly, I would say, don't look for answers that you're never going to get, because it doesn't do you any good. Secondly, listen. Listen to what people are telling you, and then make your own mind up as an adult human being or as a child. You know, make up your own mind about what you want. And I've learned that the most powerful muscle in the body is the human brain, because if you want to do it, you will do it. Irrespective of what hurdles are in your way, if you are determined to do it, you'll find a way.
Yeah, and I have to quote what you told me when we spoke last week. And I remember when I ran the marathon, I was struggling. There was a guy in front of me, and purposefully on the back of his t-shirt, because he was faster than I was, clearly, he said, "Winners don't quit and quitters don't win." And I remember a phrase that you said to me, which was, it's not over when you fail, it's over when you quit. And I've written that down, and my goodness, if there's ever a mantra for what you've been through, Brian, it's that, isn't it? It's you know, it's been just a delight talking to you this evening, and look, thank you for laying bare your experience. I can assure you it has helped one person. You know, these talks are in perpetuity. So, Brian, I think you really have been the epitome of what these talks are all about: inspiring people, you know, that's just been really enjoyable to talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to turn to some questions. So please do send us in your questions. There are a few that came in already, so I'm just going to hit you with a couple of questions here, Brian. and then we'll leave you to your evening. So here we go then. Back to your NATS job, really, is what has been the impact of COVID on NATS, on the UK airspace? I mean, it's a pretty obvious answer, but
well, as you can imagine, for anybody who's watched the news, the travel industry has been pretty decimated by the impact of COVID-19. What does it mean for us? Well, Swanwick Centre was a thriving place to work. All sorts of people worked there. Hundreds of people a day would work in that building, and down to the bare minimum now required to provide the ATC service. So all the support staff are working from home at the lowest point. So we benchmarked against 2019 summer, because that was the last time that that it was busy, I guess. And at the start of COVID-19, so in March last year, we got down to 11% of 2019's traffic, and 11%. So it's an 89% reduction in any business is fairly brutal. And we're at about 22, 23% right now. But I think the green shoots are certainly starting to be seen. There's obviously pent-up demand, and we just wait on the government opening up more and more green countries. But also we need, for that to work, we need other countries to open up as well, don't we? So, Australia, for example, is on the green list, but they won't let anyone in. So that's a pretty pointless list.
Yeah, quite. Okay, the next question is, have you learned to, I think I know the answer to this as well, have you learned about yourself as a result of your injury?
Massively. So I knew I was stubborn, which helps, and I'll be honest about that. It certainly does. But I've learned. I don't think I've changed as a person. I think the person I was has helped me with this. I think actually I've become more empathetic, which is, when I reflect on it, it's probably obvious, because you end up in a situation where you're now so far out of your comfort zone, you have to listen more, and you learn so much about other people as well, and you then realise actually that it isn't so bad, because there was a guy who I was in hospital with, amazing guy, and he was an inspiration to me. So we became really good friends in hospital, and he had a fall at home and was tetraplegic, so paralysed from the neck down, and told he would never walk again. Fed through a tube in his nose for 3 months, and left Oddstock on a frame a week before me. Unbelievable guy, so determined as well. And we fed off one another, and that helps as well. If you can find a like-minded person as a sounding board almost, then that's a really good thing.
Yeah, of course. There's a question coming in from YouTube. I think this person might know you. Adrian Lutman. Has being a Southampton fan helped with coping with the pain?
No. Well, yes, I suppose. I've had a lifetime of pain being a Southampton fan, and so that set me up really well. Hello, Adrian. I haven't seen Adrian was in the Air Force with me in the early 90s, and I haven't seen him ever since then. So, but we do have a shared support of Southampton.
Yeah. Okay, here's a great question. The obvious question: how can people support your half marathon for Aerobility?
Sorry, it broke up then at the crucial point.
How can people support your half marathon for Aerobility?
Well, nearer the time, I'll set up a Just Giving page. But right now, honest answer coming up, I haven't set one up, because what I don't want to do is set up a page and ask people to donate if there's a chance that I can't do it because of physical issues. So at the moment, every time I run, I'm getting really, really bad pain in my calf. And we're just trying to diagnose why. And the bizarrely, hip knee bone connected to the thigh bone and all that. The current thinking is that I've got a problem in my hip. So we're just trying to fix that. And so it's September the 4th, the half marathon. So in August, if my training's progressing well enough, I'll put a page up and put it on social media and ask if Aerobility will share it as well, which I'm sure we will. And then people can donate there if they so kind.
You can always walk it.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't put the organisers through that because it would take 4 hours, and that's not fair on them.
Yeah. Well, look, Brian, as I said, it's been great fun talking to you as a friend, as a fellow trustee of Aerobility, and as someone looking from the outside in and listening to your story. It's just been entertaining. It's been enlightening, and as I said earlier, I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for sharing some of your deepest thoughts. And as I say, I'm sure it's going to help others listening to this. So Brian, I'll leave the last word to you. Obviously, we share our joint passion for Aerobility, but what does the charity mean to you?
Oh, I mean, it's amazing, and we always say, don't we? Once you join the Aerobility family, you never leave. You're in it for life, and it's so true. And I remember the first time I went to Blackbush, and I was just struck by how friendly everybody was, and what just the feel of the place. And with Mike as the CEO, I mean, you couldn't meet a nicer guy, could you? I mean, I've met so many good people at Aerobility, and will be involved in the charity for the rest of my life. 100% sure of that.
Oh, here. Well, what a great way to finish on a high. Brian, have a lovely evening. We'll see you again soon. But for now, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers. Well, there we go. I really enjoyed that. That's right up there. And I'm going to listen to that back again and remind myself that, if you're having a bad day, there's always someone who can lift you. And I think Brian is certainly that person to ring up, isn't he? Right, well, that's it. We've been working very hard in the last few weeks preparing for the Armchair Air Show. That's the next big event Aerobility is bringing to your screens. 29th of May, 2 p.m, a live broadcast from Biggin Hill Airport, a 2, maybe 3 hour extravaganza of aviation. I was at the Royal Air Force Museum at Hendon last Friday, recording a brilliant interview with the fastest man on earth, Wing Commander Andy Green, talking about the Phantom. We're off to Duxford this week as well to talk about some more surprise guests. So we're going to be lifting the bonnet on some familiar faces and familiar aircraft that we just don't get to see. But we have been given exclusive access. We're building up the content. We can't wait to bring this event to you in just 2.5 weeks time now. So stay tuned on the Aerobility social media channels for more updates and information. But until the next Inspirability installment, I wish you all a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.